Bonjour à tous, bonjour à toutes.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here for session number one. Not by gender, session number one is devoted to youth, listening to youth. I would indeed like to present our speakers, Adrien COURET on the right, General Director of Emma Group, 11 people in short. You can't guess that when you see how young you are. Adrien COURET, laureate of the speech, it's 1828 this year. Pascal IMBERT, co-founder and general director of Webstone. Enrico LETTA, leader of the Italian Democratic Party. Some of you know him at Sciences Po, executive director of the Consortium of Youth of Senegal. So we're going to start very quickly because we don't have a lot of time. The previous session took a long time, but that's good. This circle was launched an operation called BACK, Talk, Act, Change, which is 16,000 young people for the last 2 months in partnership with a number of companies, which Waystone, which showed up a number of questions which are essential to young people today. I think the first one, must say, is the question of confidence, trust. 18% of the youngsters feel that they do not feel that they're comfortable. The study also showed to what extent the material aspect is important for young people. 52 people of the young ones, for instance, had to give up on medical care. I don't want to crush you with figures, just to mention 4 points as an introduction to this discussion. The first, how can you talk about youth? You have to listen to a point. There are youths and not one youth. Half of the people in France are under 20, but the heterogeneity of situations is very vast. Youth is a plural category, and I think you have to keep that in mind. More than 1 billion young people who are NEETs, neither in employment nor in education or in training. And since half of the 20-25% are students, but you have very different situations. And beyond that, say, the feasibility of young visibility is very different depending on if you are a student in the higher education schools or in the suburbs. Olivier Galland on Taylor says there are 2 youths or sociologists. Camille Police talks about the diversity of young people according to their origin, their territories, their life experience. Second thing, do you have common concerns and shared values around the climate? I said yes. In a study that we did, practically 50% of young people feel climate change as an absolute emergency. So they show more and more, they encourage more and more sobriety, show it in their traveling, in what they purchase, and so on. And at the same time, there are attitudes and values and the interest on the climate issue and the tolerance towards immigration changes depending on whether you're a student or you're a dropout from school, a worker, a young executive. So we quickly see that the sensitivity to society issues is fairly similar at the same time between the 18 and 59 years old. There's a number of values, and in certain environments. Regarding education, there are strong expectations, and whether we're talking about the programs, the cursus, the sensitivity of program, to concerning subjects which concern young children, culture. Culture is struck by the aging of publics, not only theatres, but also for rock concerts. Young people may be more and more taken up by the digital world. There's also quite a lot of isolation, and something that we will look into in our conversations. Third point, the market for employment. We know that part-time work, apprenticeships, is all linked to young people. It's an important point to me. When you try to get to the market and then you find a trajectory which is a rising one, is one thing, but when you remain in a precarious situation in a durable way, it tends to stick to you. It's what it is called a scar effect by some sociologists. So we have to develop public issues. We have to see if we're developing the right public policies, and will be a discussion we will have. And this brings me to another point, to talk about what policies are we going to develop for young people. 2 or 3 examples, what we call the universal allocation for students, something which is set up in Denmark. All the young people can have a 6 months higher education, which will be paid about 700 euros a month. And it can be used to do professional vocational training. The extension of the French RSA should be extended to the under 25 or not, and how, if you decide to do it. In a world where today we have the question of the public debt and spending. Maybe a comment on the subject. Support can create a paradoxical situation. You see in France, for instance, that when a student has a sandwich course, which is very good going to the market, it will lose a number of financial support systems. So they will hesitate to choose this public offer, which is an interesting one. So what do we do? So I'll stop on that. I'll hand over immediately to Adrien COURET. Maybe I should ask you a question. I often say the young people take risks. You are an insurance person. How do you see that point? In this very disturbed and worrying world, does risk-taking still exist? And a private actor like you, what responsibility do they feel towards youth and young people? Well, thank you for your question. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get to the heart of the subject, I want to give some points about listening to young people. Between youth and us and our ear, there are a lot of filters. You mentioned, we talked about heterogeneity of youth. Before I came here, there was something that I read when I was studying, saying that youth is only a word. Because what is the definition of youth? Amongst students, I'm old. As a company manager, I'm young. So where is the limit? So you have the young people in towns and the young people in rural areas. It's very difficult to define, and it's very often seen from the top. And something else strikes me in what can be said about young people. Very often, what is said about young people are like what the parents say about their children. What is important to point out a microphone and have a direct answer. And you have to see where you are talking from. I'm a private company. I'm responsible for mutualist insurance group, AML with Massif, ISO and others. The group employs 20,000 people. Amongst them there are youths, 11 million people insured, also young people amongst them. We do not have shareholders but representatives of the companies. So I'll come to risk-taking. Maybe that is the first subject. What do we do as an insurance company? We see that imagine people who go through life without much thought, in an unreasonable way. But actually, to get into life, you must feel protected and safe. And youth today is exposed to that. Exposed structurally because obviously it is a time of discovery when you're young. You talked about precariousness, but we have had crises which have worsened this, and So there's a lot of co-anxiety in this population. What we see as insurers in the approach in order to do prevention and securing the moralizing discourse from the top doesn't work. To accompany the young people, you must listen to them and work with the people around them, starting with the family. The first steps in life, autonomy, independence, self-awareness, you need the support of a family. The second point, all prevention approaches which are targeted very often happened with associations, for instance, prevention on risks such as drugs, risky behavior, or different exposure that people are not always aware of, and also concerning the first citizen involvement. We work with unions of students on things to bad accommodation, bad health conditions, and also taking part in civil life. You mustn't just consider those who are in a difficult situation as customers for extra protection, but those who can really play a part in their own protection. There's something important aspect for us is the employer point of view. We employ 20,000 people, and the age pyramid in it means that in the future we need to attract young people for them to find their way. We thought about talking about the meaning of a company and transitions. First expectations concerns the relationship to work and responsibility of a company on an experience at work. We're talking about the question of inequalities. Very often we see that the state talks about public policies, but an actor really playing a part in internal promotion is the businesses, and we are businesses, particularly in our group. We recruit about 1,000 people every year, and they use internal promotion, also have a very strong social aspect. So in the insurance group, the classic recruitment are people who are trained in bank and insurance. As there are more and more young people on the employment market today, the recruitment is more extensive. And what I see in the field, people who are joining the company who do insurance, and they come from retail, from trade. I was seeing a new manager, she said, I was trained at McDonald's. You couldn't have imagined that 10 years ago. So more and more people, the question of knowing how to behave is going to be something which will be constantly more essential. A second point, we will have a capacity to attract the young people when they recognize the company, not only its question of management, more open, more participative. It's not only in a technical box, but you can also work on projects within the companies. For instance, we set up in our group consultative committees for young people who can challenge the management and a number of issues and build something up around it. And there's also the question of the societal impact. If we look at what we heard about the specialists in energy, it's a question of sincerity and honesty within a company, consistency in what they're doing. And well, the companies, as a mutualist company without financial shareholders, being in solidarity economy, we're doing something not to pay shareholders. It can be seen as positive, but in the challenging we have from the young people, is that you're doing all that because you've got something behind your back of your mind, and that will benefit a financial system. We've reached a time when maybe different companies, in terms of models, they need to know it, but they can attract these populations. Last thing, listen to the youth is important. Hearing it is better. Hearing it not to see top-down solutions, but to make them play a full part in their own destiny and their own solutions. For me, that seems essential. Let me immediately turn to Marie Dupois, who won our competition at the 1825 speaker. What do you expect? Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity to express myself here on this issue about listening to young people and this organization with about 100 young people to answer questions and write a text on the problem of the economic Rencontres. So making the transformations of the world as a priority. Took part in a work group about the survey which was undertaken. How can you make use of these results, these concerns of young people, whether regarding employment, environment, the way of living, and precarity? This work group was organized by Wayside and the Circle of Economists, with not only those who belong to the group of the 1828, but also profiles which were more diversified. What came up first of all was this diversity. You have very different pathways, but with similar concerns regarding precarity, for instance, that we talked about. However, some concerns, despite variations in pathways, came up constantly, particularly when you look at surveys. For instance, you got about germ, and if you observe more generally the evolution of the concerns of youth and the influence over the years. So what can we take home from it? First of all, there is a certain concern and worries of young people within the crisis, whether pandemics, conflicts worldwide, the loss of biodiversity, or climate change. Youth more and more has the feeling that they can have no influence, whatever their place in society. And then maybe paradoxically, it doesn't mean that they are not committed and stand back from all these challenges. On the contrary, although they did not abstain from voting, there is a strong commitment for associations which mean a lot to them. Equality, success, environmental causes, and so on. So it shows maybe more than hindsight a question of trust and a difficulty to recognize yourself in the institutions, for instance, in the public policies implemented today. Within the scope of this work group, we had a chance to think about some recommendations which were formulated. And beyond what could be said, this way of working was interesting because instead of producing for youth, to a certain extent, the idea was to work with the youth, to give them a chance to express themselves, not only regarding their expectations, but also they can be aware of the difficulties or limits that may come up. For instance, we reflected on the question of menstrual precarity, the differences between men and women, also equal chances in primary and secondary school, what happens in higher education and the position of teachers. It was, we looked at, for instance, other countries like Denmark and Finland, what is done there. Within this, maybe just a question, sorry. When you say listen to the youth is a way to think of measures don't only touch young people. Well, regarding the recommendations formulated, I think that the topics which particularly interest young people, whether it is precarity, employment, or climate change, if they are a source of concerns, in particular for us, they also concern every category of the population, whatever their age, their social status, their origin, and center of interest. To think about measures for education will concern a certain age section, but it will concern other populations. For instance, if we look at environmental issues, consumption means if we give the carbon footprint of the products that we consume, it means that the youth has a way that they can work But it also answers expectations of a whole society, a great many of us anyway. Also, to come back to the question of this diversity within the youth, in the working group, it seems particularly difficult to listen to those who are furthest away from the systems. They're not in training, they're neither in employment, nor in education, nor in training. So people who are unemployed. If you look at the figures, we have a number of issues coming up in the concerns of young people. For instance, the importance of dealing with the question of disabilities and health in the professional world, both of it is in terms of representation, as an inspiration, when during recruitment or during a career. In the same way, it appears that many young women who are not working or studying are young mothers in a different situation where childcare or having to care for a dependent person is not really valorized. A lot of systems could be imagined to solve this difficulty, yet we have to be aware of this. The last solution which came up in the working group to answer this concern would be developing shorter training and leading to employment. Thank you. Pascal IMBERT, your co-founder of Wavestone. The Circle this year launched a major operation called DAC, discuss, act, and exchange. So we had fascinating discussions, partnered with the SNCF, the Post Office. Why did you agree to this initiative, and what did you expect from it when you decided to go along with it? Have you ever tried to say no to the president of the Circle of Economists? Yes? Well, we need to discuss that. But a lot of these young people, we are very young company, 30 years old on average, and I think it is a very good tempo to try and understand what is happening, what are the changes, what are the expectations of the young people who are joining the world of employment. We have a prism with we have this idea of all these young graduates coming in from Europe, for instance. We're seeing something with a given vision, but we are struck by the speed at which the situation is changing and by the disillusions which are striking young people. The fact of making these elements unobjective, by thinking about the serious problems which have been discussed, seem to me very important. And it concerns our feeling over 2 generations only. Everything has changed. 2 generations ago, we had the feeling that from one generation to another, you were living in a better world. Now it's the reverse. Each generation has an idea that the following generation is going to live in a darker, more difficult world. We thought that the social lift was working. It does. But at the same time, social determinism has become greater and greater for the elites. We had the impression 2 generations ago that technology was followed by progress, and today more and more we have the impression, and youth think that the technology is source of our major difficulties. And 2 generations, there was a belief in politics. You thought that lines could change. And today, no, people don't believe in the institutions and politics amongst young people. This has crystallized a major subject, climate, which is a fear which takes everyone's guts away. And so, do we have a future still? And are we offering the youth a future? So some reflections regarding this assessment. 4 or 5. First, this disillusionment leads to a rejection in some cases a will to challenge, to denounce the system. And this may shock us, but as decision makers, as stakeholders in this system, at a small scale like me, or a larger one like you, or in a major political party, you and I need to listen to this disillusionment and this rejection. We have to accept it, and we should self-criticize, challenge what we're doing, and try and find solutions. And in the business world, the solutions are concrete. It means commitments in CSR. It means net zero trajectory. It means inclusion, poverty, inclusion towards disabilities, and social inclusion as well. So you need to listen and be prepared to challenge yourself instead of rejecting any demonstrations which come up. For instance, when you are giving out the diplomas, for instance, I heard some epidemic reactions, and I think we must go beyond this epidemic reaction and try and understand what we can do to overcome the difficulty without being naive, and this is my second point, because denouncing the system is also a trade. It's a political trade, it's a media trade, and mustn't fall into a trap. So we're working in advisory issues, it's our turn. We have all the political attention and the media attention on us, so we are constantly being attacked. And it's interesting to see how the denunciation of the system work. It's a system in itself. And it's a bit chilling when you see to what extent the mechanic is a well-oiled one. I have a colleague who says, if you're talking about how much the consultant cabinets can influence the politicians, we do come to a number of dysfunctionings which have nothing to do with the original thesis. Dysfunctioning can be completely different issues, for instance, fiscal tax optimization, insufficient or supposedly insufficient services provided, and there's the idea that you have this underground occult conflicts of interest which lead to even more deteriorate the trust that you might have in institutions and in businesses. The two last quick comments. As an employer of young graduates, I'm seeing this disillusionment. It worries me, but at the same time, I can see there is a will to commit. I see it's become stronger and stronger, a desire to be a full part of something, to do well. And that is important because this will to do things shows an openness to others, to society, and this is leverage for the future. And the last point comes from this. As a business, as decision makers, we have a responsibility. As a company, we are a privileged area to transform this commitment into a concrete and a substantial effect. We have a responsibility to play from the environmental point of view. This is a major issue for young people. So we need to prove that we are implementing policies to meet this challenge. And we have a social commitment to prove. We need to act to recreate this social cohesion, and we need to show young people that part of the solutions can be dealt with us, and we should deal with them together. Thank you.
Alors, Enrico Letta, on a envie de
So we want to address both the hats you're wearing, that of the politician, and when I see that one youth outlet who has no way of being understood, and that the most are not represented by anyone. It's a study, Enrico, that we did. So how how do you address this question? How do you find remedies to this? And the second question to the second hat you're wearing, that is of the teacher, professor in France. 2/3 of the age groups have high school diploma, but we see concentration of orientations on elite paths, but in other sectors we have to welcome even yet more students in the other sectors. There's the elite and the other sectors of the university. Is that special to France? How do you see this? I have several other questions to ask you because your two hats, French, Italian, lead to a lot of questions on the difference in treatment between France and treatment when we're talking about youth. Microphone, please. Microphone, please. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I will start by saying that if we had had this debate, this discussion 3 years ago, we would have had a different approach than what we'll have today, because there is a radical change that we never address, never talk about, and it's the following. The COVID has been a time when youth has saved the life of the elder, I think, not the younger. Well, the youth during the COVID did absolutely not take any risks, and we stuck them in their homes to save their fathers, their grandfathers, the elders, and they lost their 16, 17, 18 years old. I lost my 54 years of age. I will, of course, recover in my 55th year, but losing that age of 17, 18, your teenage, is something that happens only once in a lifetime. So I start by saying that they were sacrificed, because if you're not aware of what happened with the COVID, a year with the Zoom exchanges, missing schools, attending schools at home remotely, you know, there's a lot of difficulties, and I think there that we need to go over this, place this at the heart of our discussions. I will just share with you my short experience. I left the political life in 2014. I came to Paris. I had this wonderful opportunity to teach in Paris at Sciences Politiques, political science schools. There were a lot of young Italians attending these schools. And during the 6 years I spent there, each day, each moment that I spoke with a young student of my country, and I was a former prime minister of my country. So I was someone who had responsibilities. And so to hear the young person who's talking, asking what training I should follow, what course he should follow. Well, the real question that person had was the following. Give me a good reason, sincerely good reason, to go back to my country and not to stay and trying to find a solution elsewhere. And it was hard for me to give a true answer, an honest answer, because I knew deep down that in other countries they had better chances than in my country, because the question of youth in Italy is one of the big Italian urgencies. Italy, if you read the books of Elena Ferrante, who was famous, you have the idea of Italy like a pyramid in which you have a lot of children at the basis, and then you have the parents' layer, uncles and aunts, and a few great-grandparents, and maybe one great-great-grandparent, so the pyramid. Today, the Italian society is a society in which you have a pyramid that is inversed. You have one child, a baby, and on the shoulders of this baby you have about 10, I'm exaggerating, but maybe 7 or 8 parents, recomposed families, what have you, the grandfathers and grandmothers who are there, and you have great-grandparents. So you have at least 20 people on this baby's shoulders that organize each moment of the baby's life with expectations on the future of this baby. Incredible weight, burden. youth is marginalized, and the youth who are lucky enough to leave the country and they try to find good fortune elsewhere in a gerontocratic country. That's the situation. My goal, and I really appreciate this invitation to come here to talk about this, my goal is to try to find the solution to an impossible equation for the political elections of next year in Italy. I'm the leader of the main central left-wing party. We're supporting the Draghi government right now. I'm happy and convinced that we're doing things right now, but we'll have elections next year, and the near impossible equation is I'll try to come up with a political program based on the role and the development of youth, trying to convince the elderly to vote for us, even if we don't talk about the challenges of the retired people, those who have a good retirement plan, those who have a difficult situation. We are faced with this difficulty. So the proposals are on 3 tiers. I propose that in my country we have that we move the voting age to 16. I know there are a lot of reasons to say no, but since the young people are very few, we have to broaden the category at 16 years for voting age. Secondly, I think that in corporations we need to establish quotas so that we have people under 40 in the boards. We did that with women. Okay, we have to do that, the same thing with the young people. And third proposal I'll make in Italy is for those who are 18, we will give them a bonus, and this bonus has to be used to become more autonomous, whether in terms of activity or studies or what have you, but it's a way of showing how serious we consider them. My conclusion is that to do all this, I did not select a team or form a team made up of older politicians, but I asked my Italian students in Sciences Politiques, Sciences Po, political science in Paris a few years ago, to come with me. So my team today is made up of these former students who are today between 25 and 30. And if the circle of the economists invite me next year after the elections, I will tell you if we won or not, if we made it or not. Sobel Aziz, as I said earlier, you co-founded and you direct the consortium Youth Senegal. You are a social entrepreneur. You're 32 years old. The African continent is home to the youngest population on the planet, and this is due to continue. And so this demography gives rise to a lot of challenges. So how to turn this into an asset? And what is this youth consortium in Senegal? Thank you, Françoise. First of all, I will train you. My name is NGOM. I will train you on how to pronounce my name. So, Sobel Aziz NGOM. So I'm very happy to be here. It's an opportunity for me to meet very interesting people who do exceptional things for youth in France. I'm from Senegal. I live in Senegal. I grew up in Senegal, studied there, worked there. And within the scope of my actions, I have more and more interactions with the youth of the world. I will start with the question, the aspect of the heterogeneity of the youth. Our youth is heterogeneous due to a lot of criteria. In my country, for example, 1 youth out of 2 is in school, access to school, which creates a deep gap on what this young person can become or not become, how the future lies for them. But there are common things between the youth of the world. And I see that today they share in common, whatever the continent. In the US, the youth are not heard on the question of weapons. In Europe, we don't listen to them on the climate issues, which is something very important. In Africa, they're not listened to on democracy and employment. In Asia, it's on security. But on all these continents, these are the key, let's say, hold the priority, and we have to find means to hear these voices, to give them the floor. But there are challenges that are not shared by all. I will talk about one that concerned me a few days ago, mobility. today, according to where you come from in the world, you have more opportunities or less to be able to go from one place to another, to be able to develop and prosper and develop these ideas. In Africa, French-speaking Africa, where I come from, mobility is very limited, which means that today I work with a young German person. When we have a meeting in London, he can go there. I can't. If we have a meeting in Bamako, we both can attend the meeting. So by having equal shares in a company, we don't have the same rights to ensure the development of this company, depending on what is accepted and what is not accepted according to where we come from. That's a key issue that breaks the unity of our youth. France and Senegal share a common history. And I'm surprised to see that in Senegal, as well in France, a lot of people are not aware of this history, of the shared history. A lot of people, due to misunderstandings, you'll see in Senegal on some walls written, France, get out. And in France, you will see no to immigration. And this has led to contempt on both sides, whether in France or in Africa or in Europe. The interdependency that brings us together is very strong. I know that your government has made a lot of efforts to try to talk to the African youth, but the problem is not that the government do not talk to us, it's that the youth do not discuss. The French youth does not know the Senegalese youth, but they have common challenges. They have a voice at the UN speaking the same language, but they can't fight together. They can't, because everybody takes care of its own problem in his own country, not hearing the other. And they're dependent on the economic situation of the youth, sad figures. Only one young person out of 10 has a formal job. The 9 others work hard, but in an informal situation. No social security, no insurance. And what you said, Marie, is absolutely true. There is a disenchantment, huge disenchantment that we observed the last municipal elections, even though the youth voted massively, but we have legislative elections. But we don't, the present political spring does not correspond to the expectations. So we try to work through associations in the field, but are always considered as small neighborhood associations who clean up the neighborhood, or we're not heard as a group of who have the technical capacity to propose things that will work and solve problems. And we're trying to do that. It's a challenge, a great challenge. I think that for this purpose there are 2 things on which I want to conclude. First of all, economically speaking, there are more and more investments, foreign investments, French investments, to support the economy of African countries. It's always investments that are elitist, and they never reach those who need it the most because of the fear of the risk. But honestly, in all our countries, the risk is a lot less than we think. Second thing, in line with what you said, we're working today on standards. Same way, you have standards to guarantee that the standards are applied with gender or environment. You need standards for the youth. And this is something we are fighting for in Senegal, but it has a world scope. There are more and more youth in the boards of the companies, more and more young people benefiting from financing. And so I will stop here and tell you thank you again. I would like to thank the 4 of you for enabling this exchange on such important topics. Thank you very much. Thank you. Maybe before handing the floor to the room, so I can ask you, what do you expect from public policies? And you, Marie, to start with. You're young, you want to be autonomous, but what do you expect from public policies? What would you consider as essential things we could do for the youth, especially the youth who are the most precarious? 2 key points related to this question. First of all, precariousness. And that more general of the better taking into account of the world of the youth and their concerns. And so there are fields of interest. So first point, precariousness. A lot of measures can be envisaged, whether universal income for the youth, more support, assistance, help, accompanying the youth in their training. carry out experimentations to see which measure are the most efficient according to the context while trying to adapt to the reality of the field. Now, for the taking into account of the youth's concerns, it's a difficulty to which we're confronted, not only for the advocacy of the youth, but more generally speaking, on climate issues. And so here again, we can carry out some reflections on the governance and the power given to the citizen conventions in the decision-making process. So I'm sorry, we're out of time. There's so much to be said on the youth. We haven't given them the floor. Luckily, you were with us, Marie. So thank you all. Thank you very much. And we wish you a fruitful rencontre, hot but warm in the relationships. Thank you.